How would you handle these worst HOA neighbors ever? This post is by Sensitive Ad 1896. I lived in the same HOA off and on in my 20s and early 30s. There were 3 or 4 streets and probably no more than about 60 houses in the development. It was a 0 lot line community and, of course, the very worst of the worst HOA jerks lived right next door. I received handwritten complaints inside my mailbox, illegal by the way, on multiple occasions. The ones I remember were about trash cans left out for too long. I was in major depressive states on those occasions, and essentially ordered to keep my dog quiet inside my own house when I wasn't even there. They would invite themselves over to my front yard to ambush me while outside with, "Your garage door doesn't need to be up right now," or "Your front shrubs need to be trimmed. This oleander should never have been planted here." On so many of these occasions, I wanted to tell this jerk where he could stick it, but he was a good 30 years older and so ridiculously entitled. I didn't have the guts, and it probably wasn't worth it. At some point, my close family member directly across the street started yelling at them as soon as they stepped foot off the road and onto the front of her property. When I left for a few years, the house sat empty while the homeowner, my family member, was in a nursing home, and then moved back. Things had escalated. Before I had left, these jerks had routinely parked a minivan in their driveway. Then their live-in, 30-something-year-old adult son got a new car and wanted it more protected, so he made some kind of deal with a woman down the street to use her garage since she didn't need the second parking spot. Fine, cool, I don't care. What I did care about was when they started complaining about cars in my driveway. This wasn't something that I did regularly, but my very close friends ended up in a legitimately unsafe situation where they lived and they came to stay with me while they figured out how to get out of their lease and move. The HOA jerk next door neighbors lost it. They tried to throw the bylaw book at me for having cars stored in the driveway. The cars were being used daily and lots of other people parked in their own driveways consistently. At this point, I went through the bylaws with a fine-tooth comb. As it turned out, there was a rule explicitly barring one homeowner from using the garage of another homeowner. Why? I don't know or care. Of course, that was a rule that didn't need to be followed, but our driveway had to be clear, shrubs trimmed to their liking, and trash cans brought in before the garbage truck was off the street. There were a couple short cul-de-sacs in the neighborhood that ran right up to a ravine, so there was no house at the end of these streets. Apparently, these jerks didn't like that a homeowner parked his work-supplied and branded truck on the street at the end of his cul-de-sac. Their first call to complain wasn't to him, wasn't to the HOA, it was to his employer that supplied the truck. These people were ruthless and garbage humans. These are the same neighbors that complained that I didn't pick up my dog's poo in my own front yard. We didn't have any backyards at all, and almost no one had grass in their small side courtyards. They were upset that my 10-pound dog who runs straight out to pee and straight back wasn't on a leash because their dog was aggressive and pulling out at the same time. Because clearly, my dog being on a leash would totally fix that. Once we got a third car and parked it routinely in the driveway, they all completely lost their minds, knocking at all hours to complain while I worked enterprise sales at home, literally peeking over their courtyard wall into my kitchen, making nasty comments to my boss about me, who they went to church with, and calling my parents and other family to complain about me. These same people caused other residents to walk a certain route to avoid going past the jerk's house. It was a quiet neighborhood, so anytime someone had a party, there was a noise complaint and lots of spying on what exactly was occurring, followed by more complaints more often than not. They convinced the HOA that we shouldn't be allowed to attend HOA meetings or use the pool because our names weren't on the deed. This even though we paid all the bills, the taxes, and the HOA fees directly. Eventually, they let me in the meetings, but tried to tell me that I couldn't speak. That didn't last long. And then they tried to not allow me to vote until my father showed up to a meeting to remind them that he owned 2 properties in the neighborhood by proxy and power of attorney. My final straws were when they had their roof replaced and their roofers entered my courtyard unannounced, seeing me partially clothed in my own kitchen and then trampling my landscaping every day for a week. After that one, I was throwing roofing nails back over their wall and onto their driveway for months. They officially complained to the HOA about a small tree that wasn't trimmed to their liking, so I brought up their son's car in the neighbor's garage, and the woman who owned the said garage ended up throwing a tantrum completely with fake tears in my living room because apparently he was paying her and she needed that income. However, it was particularly satisfying when my partner told the next door neighbor that he didn't like the highly pruned style of their front yard and preferred our slightly more wild look. I swear, that man turned as bright red as a fire truck. Almost as red as when we pointed out that the neighborhood really wasn't that nice due to the enormous metal electric towers running down the middle of our street. There were islands in the road to accommodate these huge things that you could hear buzzing even from inside 24/7. About 6 months before we bought our house and got the heck out of there, I was walking my dog on a leash and she peed in another neighbor's yard on the way by. We turned to continue and I heard a voice say, "Clean up after the dog." Well, I turned around and there was no one there. This woman was yelling at me through her doorbell about non-existent dog poop. I am not proud to say that I saw red and proceeded to read her the riot act into her doorbell and pressing it repeatedly, telling her to come out. She never said another thing, never came out, and I never did see the woman ever. I never did bring up that my awful neighbors had at least 2 businesses running out of their house, strictly forbade in the bylaws, literally broke into the irrigation system controls to water their yard more on the HOA's dime, or that they had a visible water spigot and hose in their front yard. It just wasn't worth it. Perhaps this was more of a post about bad neighbors, but I will never, ever, as long as I live, own or live in an HOA again. My family is fully out of there now, and no one has anything nice to say about the place. Do you agree with these commenters? On "In order to keep the dog quiet inside the own house," commenter says, "I didn't need to read past this. How dare someone expect peace in their own home?" OP says, you come to my door and tell me that a 10-pound dog behind the brick walls of my house is disturbing you from inside your bricked house, and I'm gonna laugh while I slam the door in your face." Comment says, "Can we not compare everyone we don't like to that group? That's super messed up and insensitive. Frankly, you both sound insufferable." What'd you think of this story? HOA Karen fines me for building on my property. I'm not even in the HOA. So I live in a nice suburban town, and all my neighbors are great, except this evil rat HOA Karen. I got into a nasty argument with none other than that notorious HOA Karen, a woman with a scummy desire for meddling in other people's affairs. While she has her own behind her husband's back, it's like everybody knows but him, or he just doesn't care. The trouble began when I built a brand new shed over in my backyard, probably violating every freaking HOA rule known to man, but to be honest, I didn't give 2 cares. You see though, there's a big problem. I was not part of this money-hungry, grubby, greedy HOA. So I scratched my head, wondering how Karen, everyone's favorite snake, had found her way into my life. Ask and you shall receive. Armed with a camera and a clipboard, she approached me with the confidence of a seasoned drill sergeant. "Excuse me, dear," she declared, "but your shed violates several HOA guidelines. I suggest you rectify the situation immediately. I'm fining you for your violations." I chuckled, a mix of disbelief and irritation brewing within me. "Karen, I'm not in the HOA. This is my property and I'll put up whatever shed I darn well please." Her eyes widened in horror, the revelation hitting her like a rogue wave. A flicker of realization crossed her face, quickly replaced by the familiar scowl that earned her the infamous title of HOA Karen. "I don't care if you're in the HOA or not," she retorted with an air of superiority. "I have a duty to protect property values, and that shed is very ugly." I refused to give in to her idiotic demands, and I stood my ground. Karen, however, was relentless. She bombarded me with violation notices, each one even more ridiculous than the last. Shade of paint too bold, lawn too tall, mailbox color disallowed. It's as if she just had this uncanny ability to detect any deviation from her narrow definition of a town's perfection, and she wrote out fines like a shady doctor writing prescriptions. Frustration led me to consult a lawyer, and armed with legal advice, I embarked on a journey to put an end to Karen's tyranny. The courtroom became our fighting grounds, and Karen, now appropriately dubbed HOA Karen in my iPhone contacts, showed no signs of backing down. Wearing her ugly signature oversized sunglasses, she portrayed herself as a defender of the neighborhood's sacred aesthetic. The legal proceedings were a roller coaster of insanity. Karen insisted that my shed cast a huge shadow on her yard and disrupted her. I could hardly believe the drama queen that she was. Yet, despite that absurdity, justice prevailed. The judge, perhaps sick and tired of Karen's whining and overbearing nature, ruled in my favor. The shed was deemed well within my property rights, and Karen was ordered to cease her meddling. As the gavel struck, a triumphant smile spread across my face. Victory was sweet, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that Karen's reign of HOA terror had come to an end. Enough of that crap, am I right? I am wondering how you can force HOA rules on somebody that's not in the HOA, unless she's just trying to have this tough persona and then you call her bluff out and then everything falls apart in this house of cards that Karen tried to build. Cheap old crappy cards. You'll love this HOA story. The OP's writing style is just funny. It's called Wanna Ruin Kids Fun Time? Okay, good luck using that luxury car. Posted by Jiggle Bounce. A little background. My friend lives in a gated community. He is on the HOA board since he is in construction and handles the community's needs if needed. The houses there range from comfy, read middle class, to I crap money, read they crap money. I am talking see-through infinity pools that you can see butts at eye level, fully equipped 4 or 5 car garages, a 2-bed space for the maid, and of course, seating areas suspiciously convenient for doing illegal substances. These houses are usually located by themselves, no neighbors at a cul-de-sac. This means the road is usually free of traffic and pretty safe for children to play, which is exactly what kids did once summer or any other holiday came along. They would ride bikes, they would race, and they'd do other kids stuff. The couple lived at one of these houses. Let's call them Mr. Cold-a-Nutsack Karen and Mrs. Cold-a-Nutsucker Karen. They were grade A muffins. They would throw parties every weekend, and it almost always resulted in crap being thrown on the street, burnt rubber from cars smoking their tires, and so on. The HOA cited them many a times, but they would just pay the fines and carry on. Mr. and Mrs. Karen never liked kids playing in front of his house. No idea why. It's not like they could just hear the kids, since the front lawn was pretty expansive and they had a gate. So Mr. and Mrs. Karen would whine over to the HOA, citing kids' safety, and my friend would go and talk to them. Keep in mind that my friend is a homeowner too, and it would go something like this. Hey, friend says, I'm here to talk to you about the complaint. Mr. Karen, yes, when's the dang HOA gonna take care of it? I actually want to discuss the issue and maybe we can find another solution. Just do it, okay? But we cannot ask parents to stop their kids from playing, and we can't stop kids from playing on this street, since it is the safest area that they can play in while being close to their own houses. It's not safe for them to be playing out there. What if I hit a kid? I don't want the liability, so just take care of it, okay? The friend is silent. Think of it as kids' safety. I am sorry, we just cannot do it. Even if we did, we can't enforce it. I will be speaking to the HOA's president. Friend says goodbye and leaves. They would calm down for a few weeks and then whine and complain again. Nothing would change their mind about complaining and demanding that the kids be banned from playing. Finally, after a year of this, the HOA caved and decided to put out a rule that kids are not supposed to ride bikes on the roads for safety reasons. Enter my friend, let's call him F, and his malicious compliance. F knew Mr. Karen had an expensive car that he loved to show off. This car rode really low, think like 3 or 4 inches, probably measured it with his Johnson. F convinced the HOA that the rule would never stick, and the only option was to install some speed humps, which are speed breakers, speed cushions, traffic calming devices, slow your roll broski devices, on the left and right sides of the cul-de-sac part where Mr. Karen's gate started. The maximum allowed speed hump height by law is 4 inches, not verified, and guess which ones F decided to install? The HOA still received complaints from the Mr. Karen, only now the complaints are about the speed humps catching the bottom of his favorite car. He wants them removed and says that it's damaging his cars and the cars of people who drive to his house for the weekend parties. The HOA responds and says, "We cannot do it in the interest of kids' safety." Read, think of it as kids' safety, jerk. He had to drive his low-riding cars diagonally. Kids still played between the speed humps, using them as boundaries for their games. One of the people who help run my HOA gets mad every time my manager comes to my house because he drives a late 90s Toyota Corolla. She says his car is too low class for our middle class neighborhood, posted by Emancipated Tree Snake. Every few weekends, my manager comes over my house to help work on a side project for the company. When he comes over, he parks in front of my house. The house across from mine just so happens to be one of the worst Karens or HOA volunteers I've ever met. She tends to take her job a bit too seriously. Anyways, she complains to my wife and I every time she sees the car like clockwork. She will either call or wait until she sees us outside. The first time, she even took it upon herself to write a letter about how it's better for everyone if we can keep up a certain image in the neighborhood. I explained to her that he is my manager after the letter about a year ago. She accused me of lying since I drive a nice truck and have a nice house, so she knows I bring in a decent salary. She assumed that my manager made more and therefore he needs to own a nice car. I then explained that my manager makes $250,000 a year and he drives a beater because he does not care about his image. She then goes on some rant about how she goes into massive debt just to keep up the right image for the neighborhood, and that it's ignorant of my manager to save his money and buy a beater when people like her are paycheck to paycheck to keep up with the Joneses. Lucky for me, I cannot get fined, but I still find it quite annoying that she is worried about the cars that my guests drive. I told my manager about her constant complaining every time he's over. He joked that he will spray paint his car with chalk next time that he comes over to make it look as trashy as possible. I told him to dress in the worst clothes as well and slowly get out of his car to make sure she notices. People who actually have money don't usually feel the need to make sure everyone knows they have it. Do you agree with this comment? Neighbor uses side entrance, which opens to our yard, for the landscaper to cut their grass. Hi, not sure if this is the right subreddit. My husband and I just bought a house in an HOA gated community with about 60 single-family homes sitting on about 0.15 acres each. The HOA was formed in around 2019, but they've only just started to enforce rules. We have this rule that fences need to be set off 2 feet from the property line. Our neighbors to the left have a fence that is set off 1 foot from the property line. They've been grandfathered in, but they have a side gate that opens inward to their property. The previous owners of our home didn't have any landscaping, so the communal landscaper would mow our lawn and then use our lawn to enter the neighbor's lawn through the side gate. We decided to plant some trees to mark our property line. We made sure to leave a gap in the trees for the gate, though my neighbor had said it's defunct and doesn't really open. Now that we have trees lining our property, since we didn't want to build a fence because it was going to have to be 2 foot set back, which seemed kind of silly, we mulched them. But now, the landscaper is saying it's too much of a pain to weed whack around them, so he would prefer 1 solid bed. Okay, we will do a solid, but we want to put edging in. Our neighbor saw my husband put edging in, which, by the way, is not easy considering we're in South Carolina and there's tough clay soil. She politely said, "Please make sure to not edge by where the gate is so the landscaper can ride in on his mower." Are we right to be annoyed that we have to adjust our landscaping in order to accommodate the mower? Should we talk to the ARB, the board? We want to be good neighbors and we also want our property to look good. Any advice is greatly appreciated. And answer, do you have a copy of the community rules? Where I live, we have a specific rule telling residents they cannot add or do things to impede the landscapers. Do you have an architecture committee? Have you talked to your management company? And OP replies, we don't have a management company. We have volunteers that make up each committee and the board. I don't think I have the latest copy of the community rules because they haven't been approved yet. It's so lackadaisical here. But the ARB said nothing about mulching and edging. That's just been our landscaper's comments. It sucks that we have to sacrifice our landscaping in order to help our neighbor have a rotting mower get in there. Wondering if the landscaper can use a smaller mower specifically for their plot. Now, you could definitely raise the question and concern here, just be very careful when you do, OP, if you decide to. The HOA fines me, but I'm not even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss the fallout of this one, and I'll see you there.